Good evening and welcome to 1800 Online, the Endgame, part of the Awake Radio TV experience. We are coming to you live from the Live Pulse News studios just outside London, here in the north of London as well. So, who's in the chat box? I did say that I would give you all a mention, and just to let you know that coming up we have an interview that I've done with David Noakes about the EU. Fantastic interview, stay tuned for that. And also don't forget, just before 7 o'clock will be our feel good video, something to make you feel good and just be amazed by the capabilities of human beings, because we are truly incredible creatures. Okay, aka Kaz, hi Kaz, hi. Bogface, medical questions at all, Bogface? Clear Angel, and hi Clear Angel. Dave Eden apparently is in the chat box. That's odd. It's not normally around here very much. Granada Steve. Reality Bites. Neil, stay tuned for him coming up later on, of course, with Reality Rocks from 9 p.m. UK time. Before that, it's Paula Live. And Nimble Horse and the very same, our beloved leader and founder, number one, Paula. Hi, Paula. Lovely to see you. Sky Blue Eyes, hello, good to know you're there as always. And Tim Raw TNT. If I've missed you out, I apologise, but I'm kind of stuck with what this tells me. All right then, so, hi. New endgame graphic. Yes, now, if you notice, we have a few more graphics. We have a few more Gucci trailers and credits and stuff like that going on. And slowly but surely these things are developing and they will change. And obviously, if there's something you'd like to see, then let us know. If you think there's something that we could do to improve the show, or suggest a new item or something regular to go, if you've got something to contribute yourself, let us know, and you can let me know direct. alantshearer@me.com is the email address, or follow me on Twitter. You can follow the show 1800 online, 1800 online is all one word. You can follow that on Twitter, and also myself, Alan T. Shearer, ALANTSHEARER. Follow me on Twitter and come and say hello, and you more likely get me on Twitter. That tends to be where I am most. Okay. So lots going on in the chat room, and always love to see that. And I've got some great info coming up about about an alternative view on the Ebola crisis coming up later on. Something to just maybe take the fear out of it a little bit for you. It's been very well researched in-house, and everything is linked. Everything's can be shown, all the links, etc, etc, etc. But first of all, David Noakes. I've referenced his work many times in the past, and will continue to do so. But it's great that I was actually able to speak to the man earlier on today. And this is the interview that he gave me about the EU. I'd like to welcome Mr. David Noakes to the show. David Noakes has written extensively on the EU, and we're going to chat about that for about 15 minutes. So, welcome, David.
Where should we start?
Okay, let's start with the history of the EU as you see it, as you understand it.
Okay, well, they very cleverly concealed the fact that the EU was started by a speech from Hermann Goering in 1940. All of the paperwork on the EU, that's to say the policies, the common agricultural policy, the common fisheries policy, the common monetary policy, were all written by the Nazis at the University of Berlin in 1942. The first summit of the European Union was held in Germany in 1943, and 13 nations attended, We in Britain didn't, of course, because we were at war with Germany.
Of course.
And it was von Ribbentrop who chaired that first EU summit. And he, of course, was a boyfriend of Nancy Astor and very well integrated with the royal establishment in England. Then they had a meeting at the Roats House Hotel, that is to say, the more enlightened members of the Nazi command, and they decided to make the European Union the container for German ambitions after their predicted defeat at the end of World War II.
Okay.
Nothing much has changed since the Nazis wrote the EU policies, but one important change did happen in 1946.
Okay.
The EU couldn't be sold as a Nazi organization to anyone, so it changed its basis from a Nazi organization to a communist organization in 1946. And Britain is the EU's major enemy because we stopped them creating this dictatorship, firstly in 1918, secondly in 1945 when Hitler had a go, and this is their third attempt. And they realize that to be successful, Britain has to be utterly destroyed. And that is why they have brought in tens of millions of foreigners into Britain, 120,000 EU regulations, which are designed to bring our economy to a standstill, and it is a miracle they have not. So they have really failed on the regulations front, but they have succeeded on the migration front, because according to the British Office of National Statistics, the English will become a minority in their own nation within 10 years and an insignificant minority in 20 years. So we will lose control of our own country, which is precisely what the EU wants. And of course, they have been aided and abetted in this by the Conservative and Labour parties. The Conservative Party was taken over by the European Union in Ted Heath's day when 8 of the people at the top of the party, including Sir Alec Douglas-Home and William Whitelaw, became Bilderbergers. And the Bilderbergers are the ultra-senior layer of Freemasonry. There's 140 of them across Europe, Angela Merkel being the most visible. And their job is to build the EU dictatorship. And they have so much power that you cannot become Prime Minister unless you are a Bilderberger. So Margaret Thatcher had to become a Bilderberger before she could become Prime Minister. And then she was rather naive, and in about the 10th year, she realized that the Bilderbergers were building a nasty EU dictatorship, and she made her Bruges speech. And within 1 year, the 7 other Bilderbergers in the cabinet had her out on the street, and a new compliant Bilderberger, John Major, put in her place. So now we have the Conservative Party again, still controlled by 8 senior Bilderbergers, of whom the leader is Kenneth Clarke, but he's about to retire, so we're not quite sure who the new leader is going to be, but he's the real leader of the Conservative Party. David Cameron is, of course, a Bilderberger, as is George Osborne, and they are making absolutely certain that it is the policies of the European Union that apply in Britain, which is, of course, illegal because under Britain's written constitution, Parliament is only allowed to implement the wishes of the British people, but Parliament, for the last 40 years now, has implemented the wishes of the European Union.
It's simply been a rubber stamping system for Brussels, hasn't it? It's just been a state admin office, really, for Brussels.
That's correct, yeah. So, you know, David Cameron, who is a serial liar, his latest lie is that, he promised the Scottish people more devolution. He can't deliver it. It's a lie. It takes Parliament to deliver it. He can't deliver it. When he was in opposition, he promised us all a referendum. It should have happened by now. It's not happened. So what he's done is he's made another promise. He'll have another referendum in 5 years, and each 5 years he'll keep making another referendum promise. But of course, he's now promising, because of the rise of UKIP, that he will get tough on immigration. Well, as a controlled, paid servant of the European Union, he will only do what the European Union allow him to do, and he will not do anything about immigration. But he will lie about it.
Yes. Now, we've also seen today they're talking about this extra £1.7 billion which has to be paid because our economy has done better since 1995. We know that this is just blustering, and we also have the Tory party basically saying that Cameron can challenge the Commission and he can refuse to pay, etc. Now, we know that the power of the Commission is total, is ultimate, so they don't even listen to their own MEP. So what notice are they going to take of David Cameron?
Well, of course, he will pay it. And as you've rightly identified, but do we care? The European Union costs us 20% of our economy now. There are 8,500 EU-mandated quangos, which, according to the Cabinet Office, cost us 210 billion a year. Well, that's about 3 or 4 years ago. It'd be more than that now. Before 15 years ago, we didn't have them. This is pure waste. It's the largest bribery structure on earth, with some of the directors board members being paid 700,000 a year. Then, according to the government's Better Regulation Commission, in 2005, the last year for which we have figures, European Union regulations, 120,000 of them now, cost this economy 100 billion. You put those two figures together, and you have well over 300 billion, or 20% of our economy. If we leave the European Union, we can save that 300 billion. Now, the BBC, of course, never mentions this. No media ever mentions that the biggest cost of the European Union to Britain is not the contribution, which is sort of 11 billion, who cares? It is the 300 billion of the EU regulations and the EU quangos.
Now, this is something I've been talking about on the radio and here on television, and I serialised on the recent vote or selection that we had for the EU, the very poor turnout. On the run-up to that, I serialised chapters on my radio programme from the Nazi route to the Brussels EU, the online book, and I sort of serialised that, talked about it and championed that book. You know that book, obviously?
No, I don't know that
okay.
book. Sorry.
It basically outlines the history of the EU, which is where I got a lot of the. I was fascinated to know that it had come out of Nazi plans, etc. So the work that you do on the work that you've put on your website, where have you researched that from? Has it taken a long time to put that together?
Well, it took years. I started in 1995.
Okay.
And then I took a whole year publishing anti-EU newspapers. I got up to 100,000 turnover, given away freely, pushed through letterboxes. And I did a huge amount of research for that. But I mean, most of what is published is also published in newspapers somewhere. It's just that I've pulled it all together.
Right.
I mean, the corruption at the top of British society now is absolutely mind-blowing. We invaded Iraq and killed 1.5 million people on the basis of lies about weapons of mass destruction that we knew did not exist.
Yes.
We've turned the whole of the Arab world against us as a result, and we've created ISIS, for which, of course, Tony Blair and George Bush, both of whom are war criminals, should take full responsibility. And then, of course, over the last 40 years, with 6 EU treaties, the Queen, our ministers, government ministers, and 362 MPs have abolished the nation of Britain. And of course, it was the Lisbon Treaty on the 1st of January 2009 that did finally abolish Britain after 3,500 years. That is not just the greatest crime in history, but under our treason laws, all of those involved, including the Queen, should already have hung by the neck until dead. That is how serious the abolition of the nation is. And the reason that treason is the most serious crime is because if you abolish our English democracy, you expose us to the danger of moving into a different system. And of course, the system that we are moving into is slavery under an unelected EU dictatorship. And that is why these people, including the Queen, should hang by the neck until dead.
David Noakes, very powerful information about Europe there. Thank you very much. Also, I'd just like to add that at some point I'd like to interview you about your other interest in your health interest.
Yes, it is shocking that 160,000 people a year in England die of cancer because oncologists tell two lies. One, you'll be dead in X months unless you take chemotherapy. And two, the only option is chemotherapy when there are a dozen options better than chemotherapy. And chemotherapy, the poison of chemotherapy, is the worst of all the options if you have cancer. And that corruption in the medical profession kills 160,000 Britons a year unnecessarily. And the number 4 killer of human beings is properly licensed prescription drugs. And they also kill 2 million a year in the USA with licensed prescription drugs. And we don't have figures for the rest of the world, but it'll be about the same. So the medical world is as corrupt as the governmental world, but it probably kills more people.
Well, what I'd like to do, David, is get you on in the next week or so, if we can, and do an extended interview about that very topic, because I know it's something that would be very popular with the viewers of Awake TV and also the listening community of Awake Radio. Once again, David Noakes, thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you again very soon.
And thank you for inviting me on the programme.
Welcome back. So, David Noakes talking about the history of the EU, the real facts about the EU, not just the history, but also the modern day reality of everything that was drawn up for us by those Nazis back in 1941, how it's all come to pass. The book that I referred to there, which is something that I was serialising, is called The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU, and it's available as a free download in PDF form if you go to the website relay-of-life.org. Now, let me say again that I have no association whatsoever with this. This was a research tool that I used when I was looking at the EU, the history, and I was so taken with it and so impressed with the way that it's presented, showing all the evidence, that I serialised it on the radio programme, and I do want to do more work with this. But let me just tell you what they say, their explanation of the book. It's what you always wanted to know about the Brussels EU, but no one dared to tell you. This book tells a story that many readers may, for obvious reasons, initially reject. In doing so, they may say that if the far-reaching historical information documented here were true, they would surely have heard about it before. Well, mindful of this, we as the authors consider it our responsibility to encourage our readers not only to read this book, but also to visit and study the source documents noted at the bottom of its pages. For almost 3/4 of a century, the world has been told that World War II was caused by a psychopath, Adolf Hitler, and his entourage of racist hooligans, the Nazis. The facts are, however, that World War II was a conquest war conducted on behalf of the chemical, oil and drug cartel with the goal of controlling the multi-trillion-dollar global markets in the newly emerging fields of patented chemical products. Official documents from the US Congress and the Nuremberg War Crimes tribunals unequivocally show that World War II was not only prepared but also logistically and technically facilitated by the largest and most notorious oil and drug cartel at that time, namely the German IG Farben cartel, composed of Bayer, BASF, Hoist and other chemical companies. The summary of the indictment from the Nuremberg proves that without IG Farben, World War II could not have taken place. You'll also learn in this book that World War I, the second largest tragedy of the 20th century, was actually the first attempt at world conquest by these corporate interests. Moreover, after both these military attempts to subjugate Europe and the world had failed, the oil and drug cartel invested in a third attempt, the economic and political conquest of Europe by means of the Brussels EU. Not surprisingly, therefore, the key architects for the Brussels EU were recruited from among those technocrats who had already designed the plans for a post-World War II Europe under the control of the Nazi cartel coalition. This book will introduce you to these stakeholders of the cartel, dressed not in military uniform, but in grey suits, the most notorious of whom was Walter Holstein, the first president of the so-called EU Commission. The answer to the question as to why you have probably not heard about these ground-shaking facts before is straightforward. After 1945, the cartel invested hundreds of billions of dollars with one goal only: to rewrite history and cover its criminal past. This cover-up with regard to the corporate origins of two world wars was obviously the precondition of the cartel's third attempt, this time via the Brussels EU, at the conquest and control of Europe. Evidently, the cartel interests had hoped to cement their control over Europe via the Brussels EU, without these dark roots ever being exposed. However, this plan has failed. The publication of this book and tens of thousands of authentic documents that it references may mean that the Brussels EU experiment is over. No democratic person, organisation or party can possibly show support to this third attempt at the conquest of Europe. This book is also a unique opportunity for all those politicians and political parties who've been lured into supporting the Brussels EU without knowing its background or understanding its true purpose. This includes the now 28 heads of state who've signed the Lisbon Treaty, the majority of whom did not understand that their signatures constituted an enabling act for the cartel and its stakeholders to seize control over Europe. These politicians and political parties now have the chance to make a complete turnaround and to publicly revoke their support for a model of Europe that has been built upon decades of lies and deception. We therefore encourage you, the reader of this book, to help disseminate this important information among your family, friends, work colleagues and in your community. Moreover, we encourage you to confront your political representatives at the local, regional, national and European level. With the information contained in this book, in doing so, you must urge these politicians to make a choice. Either they can close their eyes to the truth and thereby recklessly support the takeover of Europe by a dictatorship of corporate interests, or they can act to protect democracy and the health and life interests of millions of people. The choice these politicians make with regard to their position on the Brussels EU will be the most important decision of their political lives. After the last attempt of the cartel to control Europe had failed in 1945, one of the most widely used excuses by its political stakeholders was that they didn't know. After the publication of this book, however, no politician today can make such a claim in defence of his or her continued support for the Brussels EU. From a historic perspective, what is most urgently needed now is a movement of the people. This is particularly important because politicians in many countries across Europe have become influenced by the corporate interests of the oil and drug cartel. Plus, they are no longer independent defenders of interests of the people. A movement of the people will therefore be the only guarantor of freedom, democracy and independence for the people of both Britain and Europe. If you want to know more about that and have a look at the book for yourself, please go to relay-of-life.org and make up your own mind. But please don't do that until you've read the book and the source materials, as I have. So thanks again to David Noakes. He will be back. I've got an interview lined up with him on the 3rd of November. And this time he'll be talking about cancer cures. Yes, that's right. I said cancer cures. It can be cured, and there are many ways of doing so. And I'll be talking to David about that on the 3rd of November. Okay, I talked about some research that had been done about Ebola and about the possibility that not all is not as we are being told. Now, many of you will know that if you're listening to Awake Radio and or any of its affiliates, or you're watching this and you have been doing for some time, that we don't believe everything the prostitute media tell us. And whilst this bit of technology decides it's going to load up, here we go. We'll be looking at this, and I want to read you this. Now, some of it you will have probably heard before if you are a regular listener or watcher, but it's kind of coming to a conclusion now. We've done this in 3 parts, and we will be concluding it now. Okay, Ebola, is it the deadly disease that we're being told? Is that what's causing all this strife and all this fear across West Africa, or is there something else? This is what our researcher here at Awake Radio had to say. I decided to make a somewhat detailed breakdown of my stance on this whole Ebola situation, or at least part of it. Since my views on the whole thing have recently changed quite a bit, first off, let me start by saying I do believe Ebola is a real disease, and I can concur with that. In fact, I can concur with all of this, but that I particularly want to underline. Ebola is real. And I do think Ebola is being spread right now in West Africa. Somewhat, just not in the way we're being told by the media or by officials. Okay, so let's start from the beginning then. Earlier this year, Department of Defence funded Ebola vaccine, TKM Ebola, started its first round of human trials. January 22nd, 2014, Tecmira doses first subject of human clinical trial of TKM Ebola. Tecmira Pharmaceuticals Corporation has dosed the first subject in a phase 1 human clinical trial of TKM Ebola, an anti-Ebola viral therapeutic that's been developed under a $140 million contract with the US Department of Defense. Another heavy investor in the TKM Ebola vaccine maker is Monsanto. There's that name again. And just 9 days prior to the first TKM Ebola human vaccine trials, back in January 22nd, 2014, Monsanto paid a $1.5 million retainer. For some reason, here we go. Milestone payment to the company. It was like a retainer. It was a milestone. They'd reached a certain point, so now they were to be given this $1.5 million. Tecmira Pharmaceuticals Corporation, a leading developer of RNA interference or RNAi therapeutics, announced today that it has received a $1.5 million milestone payment from Monsanto following completion of a specified program development. And this comes from investor.tecmirafarm.com. This TKM Ebola vaccine, as you can probably tell by now, is developed by a company called Tecmira Pharmaceuticals. It's based in Canada. It's basically, we believe, a front company for Aline Lam, Bristol Myers Squibb, Merck and Pfizer, which all have a direct partnership with Tecmira. This company could be being used as a legal scapegoat. In addition to its pipeline of products, taylor-shearer has collaborative or partnership agreements with leading companies in the RNAi field, including Lam, Pfizer, Takeda, Bristol Myers Squibb and Merck. And that comes from ic.gc.ca. 2 months after the Phase 1 human clinical trials of TKM Ebola take place, Guyana alerts the World Health Authority of the first sign of an Ebola outbreak in 2014, and this was declared on March 25th, 2014. The TKM Ebola Phase 1 clinical trial is a randomised, single-blind, placebo-controlled study involving single ascending doses and multiple ascending doses of TKM Ebola. The study will assess the safety, tolerability and pharmacokinetics of administering TKM Ebola to healthy adult subjects. 4 subjects will be enrolled per cohort. There are 4 planned cohorts for a total of 16 subjects in the single-dose arm and 3 planned cohorts for a total of 12 subjects in the multiple-dose arm of the trial. Each cohort will enroll 3 subjects to receive TKM Ebola and 1 who will receive a placebo. So the CDC then, March 25th, 2014, the initial announcement of an outbreak. According to the World Health Organization, or WHO, the Ministry of Health of Guyana has reported an outbreak of Ebola hemorrhagic fever in 4 southeastern districts. Reports of suspected cases in the neighbouring countries of Liberia and Sierra Leone are being investigated. In Guyana, a total of 86 suspected cases, including 59 deaths. Case fertility ratio of 68.5% had been reported as of March 24th, 2014, and that's direct from cdc.gov. It then comes out after this that taylor-shearer TKM Ebola human trials are put on hold due to safety concerns. Taylor-shearer shares skyrocket as Ebola outbreak intensifies in Africa. Shares of Canada's taylor-shearer Pharmaceutical Corp, which has ambitions of producing the first treatment for the deadly Ebola virus, have skyrocketed as the worst ever outbreak of the virus intensified in West Africa. While human tests of the company's treatment were put on hold last month due to safety concerns. That comes from news.yahoo.com. Gee, I wonder, did those safety concerns happen to be causing Ebola in the hosts? While the locals seem to think it might, to the point where one of the other hospitals at the epicentre of this whole mess, the Kenema Government Hospital, had most of its workers go on strike. July 22nd, 2014, Sierra Leone. Nurses go on strike over Ebola deaths. These are nurses at the Ebola-infested Eastern Kenema district went on strike following the death of 3 of their colleagues. The victims died from the viral hemorrhagic fever which they had contracted whilst caring for infected patients. The striking nurses at the Kenema Government Hospital accused the Health Ministry of failure to properly manage the epidemic, which they say led to the deaths. The government has been criticised for not providing enough personal protective equipment to healthcare workers who are also unhappy with their remuneration. Among their demands include the relocation of the Ebola wards from within the Kenema General Hospital. And just 1 day later, the hospital itself was forced to tell Tulane University to stop its Ebola testing taking place at their hospital for the past several months. Ministry of Health and Sanitation, Sierra Leone, July 23rd, Tulane University to stop Ebola testing during the current Ebola outbreak. George Soros, his Ebola bioweapons lab, and the death of World Health Organization spokesperson Glenn Thomas in the Ukraine. That is from birdflu666.wordpress.com. Sierra Leone closes its US bioweapons lab at the centre of an Ebola outbreak, and it stops Tulane University from Ebola testing. It's also important to note that the taylor-shearer TKM Ebola human trials were put on hold at the same time as the Kenema Government Hospital forced Tulane University to stop its Ebola testing, which started in Guyana and carried over into Sierra Leone. Like I said, I do think Ebola is real and is being spread, just not the way the prostitutes and officials are telling us. Which brings us to the overlap point. You see, at this point, March-July 2014, Tulane University was able to slowly infect people with Ebola in a controlled manner in Sierra Leone, allowing for the base cover story of Ebola. But after being forced to stop their testing, aka controlled Ebola spread, in mid-July 2014, at about the same time the mainstream media started hyping Ebola on an international scale, they had to do something else to keep the Ebola hype, fear, or spread going in the minds of the public. Which brings us to the water well poisoning. It was taking place in the same areas for months, primarily in Liberia and parts of Guyana and Sierra Leone, which is said to be being carried out by a group of 250 plus men with the aim of poisoning multiple villagers' water supplies with mass amounts of both powdered and liquid concentrated formaldehyde, which just so happens to, you guessed it, cause Ebola-like symptoms, including the hemorrhaging. Ingestion of as little as 30 millilitres or 1 ounce of a solution containing 37% formaldehyde has been reported to cause death in an adult. That's a tiny amount. Ingestion may cause corrosive injury to the gastrointestinal mucosa with nausea, vomiting, pain, bleeding and perforation. Corrosive injuries are usually most pronounced in the phalangeal mucosa, epiglottis, esophagus. Systematic effects include metabolic acidosis, CNS depression and coma, respiratory distress and renal failure. The latest information obtained reports that arrests have been made across Monrovia from Congo Town to Vi Town in connection with well poisoning. A witness said the man caught poisoning the Sheffelin well told the community that about 250 men had been trained around the country to poison drinking water. He added that the water was tested on a dog at the scene, which melted instantly. Armed men have allegedly poisoned wells in Liberia's New Georgia in order to kill the residents under the pretext of an Ebola outbreak. The water from the wells and pumps has been used by thousands of people in the area. At least 16 people are suspected to be dead because of well poisoning in the Mugibi community. A few suspects are under police custody after the alleged poisoning. One of the accused is said to have confessed that 250 men have undergone training to poison wells across the country, but the claim is yet to be verified. That comes from ibtimes.co.uk. And that's also covered in liberianobserver.com. And go figure, one of the recent likely Ebola hypes was the unnamed British man who died in Macedonia from internal bleeding. The Ebola outbreak fear spread as Britain with symptoms dies. The man suffered fever, vomiting and internal bleeding before he died. That's from cbc.ca. It turns out, though, he didn't have Ebola after all. Britain, who died in Macedonia, did not have the deadly virus, officials say. Health officials have said that the Briton who died in Macedonia on Thursday did not succumb to Ebola. So what caused the internal bleeding and death, I wonder? The Briton was reportedly consuming large quantities of alcohol and formaldehyde or methanol, which has to be reported in water poisoning incidents in Liberia. It's soluble in water and alcohol. Could he have been the victim of a toxic attack to simulate an Ebola outbreak in Central Europe? It's a very good question. Anyways, to sum it up for now, I believe the 2014 Ebola outbreak is real, but much smaller in scale, more controlled and less transmittable than we're being programmed to think. A lot of overlapping events, confusion, fear and media hype added to the mix. In my opinion, and it's my opinion as well, Liberia is mainly formaldehyde water poisoning with a very small amount of real Ebola cases, primarily the primary poison target. Guyana is a mix of both, crossover of controlled Ebola release and some formaldehyde water poisoning. And Sierra Leone has the most cases of real Ebola, but for the most part, are dying down, and we are being replaced by formaldehyde water poisoning now to keep up the cover until 2015, when the 10,000 doses of NIAID GSK Ebola vaccine and 100,000 doses of the CNLM VSV EBOV vaccine should be about ready to be used in a part of the Phase 1 mass vaccination programme in West Africa. In my opinion, most of the Ebola-related deaths in West Africa are not Ebola-related at all. Directed to the coordinated drinking water poisonings happening across the 3 countries designed to mimic Ebola. And I highly doubt a single case outside of West Africa is Ebola at all. I could go on for ages, and I will update this thread with more details about how I feel the media is playing into the agenda and how this is all likely to be part of a 3-phase vaccination agenda starting in early 2015 and ending in 2018. There is going to be a start-off as optional for most, forced for selectors areas, the transition over time to become more and more mandatory for even unaffected regions, and that means us here in the West. Phase 1, current, target the sheep. Phase 2, target submitters. Phase 3, wipe out resistors. As part of a Gates Foundation funded global vaccination or sterilisation RFID agenda via the Global Vaccine Action Plan with the aim of global immunisation by the year 2020. Which is all just a small piece of the overarching UN Agenda 21 and the ushering in of their New World Order. So, once again, let's clarify, we're not saying there is no Ebola occurring in Africa, but what we are saying is the media is escalating to an unbelievable proportions to bring fear to the rest of the world, and the occurrences of Ebola have been managed as they have in previous outbreaks that never get to pandemic levels, and that the scenario that's the scenario in Africa. Clearly, it is to provide a greater official access to the UNEI alliance into Africa in order to ship in war equipment and soldiers, to allow the mining and other multinationals to further loot the continent at will through the front organisation that UNMIR merely is. So far, this has been working well since all governments assist in the cover-up of the true nature of the no outbreak. As I mentioned in my previous message, in Africa we have people getting sick from their water that's been poisoned on purpose and from the Red Cross vaccines, all being done to create a fraudulent Ebola-like crisis, which adds yet more credibility to the fact that the BBC admitted 3 times that there is no Ebola in the original epicentre of the outbreak. And that particular piece of information comes from truthsector.net. Okay, why are there no photos of Ebola victims from these alleged Ebola-infected countries? Could it be that Ebola will only affect those netless or phoneless, so they've got no access to the internet or a mobile phone? I think not, as the areas allegedly affected are urban environments, which means cell phone coverage and net access. Google, Facebook both exist in Africa, as the net never stops at the hub nodes for censorship and detox of info by any imaginary border crossing. We've seen cell phone coverage of CNN hoaxing and paying people to stage a scene of being an Ebola victim, but still no Ebola victims, from family members, nurses, eyewitnesses and bystanders from this current outbreak. Just to let you know as well that there are 750 million cell phone subscriptions in Africa and over 200 million private web-connected computers. So it's not like they don't have access, and it's not like many millions of people don't have the ability to take photographs or video. Liberia has announced that journalists will not be allowed to photograph Ebola victims and that all Ebola photos will be censored and trigger criminal prosecution. But what about Sierra Leone, which also has Ebola and has produced 0 photos of it, as well as the other countries where no such bans are in place? What about cell phone pictures? Liberia still has internet and millions of cell phone cams. Why no Ebola photos? Still, to this day, there is not a single Ebola picture on the web that came from this outbreak. With a dated Google search to February 1st of this year forward, showing only old Ebola pictures that have been reposted, smallpox pictures that have been labelled as Ebola. With all these cell phone cams and internet connections, something is seriously wrong with that. Let's move on to the final part now. In the previous two parts, it's been explained that the Ebola outbreak is really an big lie, escalated by mainstream media as per the swine flu epidemic that was reported to have potential to kill millions before the end of the flu season. Well, that didn't happen. That turned out to be a hoax orchestrated by the World Health Organization and the CD Centre for Disease Control, or Disease Creation. A more aptly named Centre for Disease Creation, the Red Cross has brought the virus to 4 specific countries, and those who receive treatments and injections from the Red Cross are only ones contracting it. The Ebola scare has backfired on them in West Africa, as now people in those nations do not want the Red Cross and other aid workers in their community for fear of spreading the so-called outbreak to the communities, as highlighted in these stories. Kulu Bengu, Guyana, 8 youths, some armed with slingshots and machetes, stood warily outside a rutted dirt road on an opening to the high reeds, the path of the village of Kulu Bengu. The youths were blocking the path to prevent health workers from entering. If we don't want any visitors, they said their leader, Fava Larundu, 17, president of Kolo Bengu's Youth League. We don't want any contact with anyone. The others nodded in agreement and fiddled with their slingshots. Health workers here say they are now battling 2 enemies: the unprecedented Ebola epidemic, which has killed more than 660 people in 4 countries since it was first detected in March, and fear, which has produced growing hostility toward outside help. And that comes from the New York Times. So, let's round this off because we are running out of time. The US Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, a well-known centre of biowar research located in Fort Detrick, Maryland, they have been involved in this. Tulane University in New Orleans, USA, winner of research grants, including a grant of more than $7 million, the National Institute of Health, to fund research with the Lassa viral hemorrhagic fever. The US Centre for Disease Control is involved. Doctors Without Borders, also known by its French name, Médecins Sans Frontières, they are involved. Tecmira, a Canadian pharmaceutical company, they're complicit. UK's GlaxoSmithKline. Kanema Government Hospital in Kanema, Sierra Leone. Troops have zero use as a pandemic situation, as bullets will not stop a virus. Now, we've seen more army troops heading out to Sierra Leone from Britain recently. What is really needed is trained medical staff that understand the hazards and are capable of handling a stressful situation in a safe, secure and caring way. Failure to provide medical assistance to these countries implies there is no outbreak after all. Why would you send troops knowing that you could not bring them back if they have been exposed to a deadly virus without long and lengthy quarantine and attrition by giving the troops a Purple Heart before departure, as no officer will go near them to pin them onto a soldier infected in the line of duty? I think not, but they will gladly give them a medal posthumously and send out the telegram. Dear Mother, your son died a horrible death for your country. Be proud and remember it was for your safety. That's not something that anybody needs to see. Nobody needs to read that. Nobody needs to be getting that at all. It's absolutely appalling what's going on. And if this evidence is true, and it has been checked, the Ebola outbreak is not as big as we are being told by the prostitutes. There are people going around poisoning water with formaldehyde, which has the exact same symptoms. Too much of a coincidence, I think, that all that was happening at the same time, and still is. You need to make sure you are aware and you are awake and you do your own research. Check these things out. I will try and post the links that are included in this article at some point in the future so that you can read them for yourself. I'll have a quick skim through the prostitute newspapers and then we'll go to our feel good video. Okay, so here is, this has been highlighted for us. Council leaders have defied the government on one of the most controversial school reforms by challenging strict rules against parents taking children on term time holidays. Now, this is something that we talked about with Cheryl, and she was talking about the fixed penalty notices that could end up being hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Don't find parents are taking the kids on holiday, says James Lyons, deputy political editor of The Mirror. Okay, the lowest of the low then. Fascist attack tragic Linda. A far-right group is exploiting the death of TV's Linda Bellingham to spread its fascist views. Britain First tricked Facebook users into liking and sharing photos of the actress, which then links to its hate-filled website. Apparently they have a hate-filled website. Haven't visited it, so I couldn't tell you for myself whether it's hate-filled, but that's what the lowest of the low rag says. Sad to see the passing of Alvin Stardust, but sunlight is key to fighting diabetes. Sunlight is good for you. There it is, the Daily Express says so it must be true. Sunlight is key to fighting diabetes. It's good for you. Vitamin D, all that kind of stuff. It's the sunblock which is carcinogenic and causes cancer. Brussels asks UK for more cash because our economy is doing so well. And David Cameron will pay it, even though he says that he won't. He will have to because his bosses have told him so. Deportation, deportation, deportation. Let's scare everybody because of the foreigners. Miliband toughens Labour's immigration policy to counter UKIP. That's good coming from a Marxist, isn't it? Everyone must clock in or out whenever they enter or leave Britain. So we're going to have more checks and more things for us to do at the borders and crack down on foreign criminals and benefits posturing, say rivals. It's all just coming from the same thing, isn't it? And The Guardian, that shows a very grainy image of the Canadian shooter there. Somebody who was, at first, he was the son of a Canadian minister. Then he was the son of a jihadist. They just can't make their minds up. It's all nonsense. Right, let's forget about that for a bit. Let's look at how amazing we as human beings are. Every week, or at least every show, I try and finish with something positive and uplifting, and this really is. I hope you've got a head for heights again. last one. Yeah, I wouldn't encourage anybody to break the law and trespass, but climbing a crane is absolutely amazing. I did see some in the Far East where they climbed up to the very, very top of a crane that was already on top of a skyscraper, and they had to climb through the clouds to get there. It's just amazing. I've probably shown that video before. But aren't we amazing? Aren't we capable of incredible, incredible feats? And aren't we capable of incredible thoughts? And we have an immense power to do a lot of good and to just be amazing. So all this stuff that we see that's vile and horrible, and New World Order taking over, and viruses and Ebola and crime and death and destruction, that's not what we are about. That's not what the human race is about. We are incredible people. We are powerful, and we can be immensely positive. I want to leave you with that thought. Have a good weekend. Have a safe weekend, whatever you're doing. And make sure you and your friends and family can rejoin us on Monday at 4 p.m. No, in fact, no, not Monday. We won't be here Monday. We have to be away. We are out on location. So Wake TV will be back on Wednesday, next Wednesday. Nearly. Right, take care, stay safe, and to whichever deity you give your faith, may they bring you peace. Bye-bye.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're so glad to see so many of you lovely people here tonight. We would especially like to welcome all the representatives.
GCHQ, Cheltenham.
Who have chosen to join us here in the Palace Hotel Ballroom at this time. We certainly hope you all enjoy the show. And remember, people, that no matter who you are and what you do to live, thrive, and survive, there's still some things that make us all the same. You, me, them, everybody. Everybody. Everybody needs somebody.
Alan Taylor-Shearer presents The End Game in association with Live Pulse News and the 1800 Online Network. From 6 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Productions are a small independent sound recording company based in rural Hertfordshire. We specialise in creating content for all your podcasting needs, whether it be field recordings, vox pops, or capturing the atmosphere during social events. Editing is a very time-consuming job, so Spamhead Productions are on hand to take away some of the burden for you. Just advise us on how you'd like your content to sound, and we will do the rest. We can even help you design and manage a website for your podcast too. Visit us now, spamheadproductions.weebly.com. That's spamheadproductions.weebly.com.